Chaos might be a ladder, but apocalypse is a state of mind. Welcome everybody to our discussion of Death Masks by Jim Butcher. This is the 5th or 6th book in the Dresden Files series. This video is going to come to us in two parts. The first part is going to be very, very friendly to people who are reading the series for the first time. And then the second part, I'm going to go into all of the spoilers for the entire series, everything through Battleground, which is the latest book that's out as of this recording. And I will give you ample warning if you want to skedaddle and go read the rest of the series before I spoil everything for you. So let's get down to book-only spoilers. Harry Dresden and Mortimer Lindquist going on the Larry Fowler show is hilarious because as much as Dresden tries to keep his magic under control and the vanilla mortals happy, he can't hold out for too long. You're a wizard, Harry, and that means that being a disaster around technology just comes with the territory. He probably should not have made that joke about destroying equipment, considering that he got sued at the end of the book for everything that went on the fritz during the show, but, you know, it's a choice. We get what I consider to be a very underappreciated dose of vanilla mortals just not wanting to acknowledge that the magical world is real and that it is terrifying. The fact that Ortega and a Denarian were able to come on the show without anybody noticing except for Harry, and Ortega joking about making people think he was a vampire, was pretty gutsy. These powerful magical beings are very good at blending in, and youngster Dresden is being sloppy and messing things up without even trying, and it's hilarious. A vampire duke, a demon priest, and a wizard walk into a bar. The joke just writes itself. We also learn later that Waldo Butters was committed for 3 months after identifying some of his patients as not being human. Given the lack of respect that Murphy and SI get, and the supernatural baddies being able to come out in the open, humanity just wants to pretend that the supernatural world doesn't exist and will do anything that they can to make sure that acknowledging it openly doesn't happen. People don't want the truth, they just want what makes them feel comfortable. And I feel like that lesson applies to a lot of things. I wonder what Wizard Montjoy is doing in the Yucatan. So much that once you finish the series, I have a video that I will link down in the description that I have done about this subject. Mentioning one very specific place twice in 2 books means that a throwaway line might not be a throwaway line. Maybe he's on some super secret recon mission for the White Council, and maybe he's just chilling in the wrong place at the wrong time. Because, you know, wizards kind of just do their own thing, and they don't always listen to other people. I don't know, we know Harry's stubborn, so I'm sure all the other wizards are stubborn too. Hopefully, he makes it out okay. Now let's talk about the war between the White Council of Wizards and the Red Court vampires. In Chapter 4, Susan talks to Harry about how there are different philosophies on how the war should be going down. Ortega has the unpopular notion to finish things out, whereas a huge chunk of the Red Court supports the ongoing conflict. Some even want to use this as an opportunity to just wipe out the White Council completely. Apparently, Ortega would rather defeat Harry and let the reluctantly combative White Council sue for peace, pay some concessions, and move on. As long as Harry is alive, though, the rest of the Red Court has an excuse to fight. And thus we have the stakes for the book. Many of the Reds hope that if they take out the entire White Council, then they could operate in the open. This reaffirms the White Council's position as being a sort of guardian for humankind against magical shenanigans. It also raises the stakes for the people outside of the two groups that are involved in the conflict, or could potentially become involved. The Red Court always hides around the locals, and without the wizards to keep them in check, they kind of just feed at will. And bad things happen. Susan is in a really weird position right now. She's half turned from grave peril and trying not to fall into being completely a Red Court vampire. She gets these tattoos that help her know when she needs to get away from other people and calm her hunger down. She's also got a new not-boyfriend named Martin. Martin is the kind of guy that your girlfriend tells you not to worry about, but Harry knows better. Martin seems like the most boring person on the planet who can just blend into any situation, and that makes him dangerous, because he can blend into any situation. Harry heavily distrusts Martin, even though Susan obviously still cares about Harry more. This is sort of a jealousy thing, and it's a really hard emotion for Harry to deal with. I assume that the Red Court at least has some people in its leadership that are strategic thinkers like the Merlin of the White Council. There seems to be separate factions, but there could also be multiple layers of planning, like a plan, a backup plan, and an ace in the hole. Susan getting bitten and eventually taking Harry out or turning him into a Red Court vampire herself could be one of those layers of redundancy in Team Red's plans. At the very least, they could possibly use her to control Harry, which would mean that he would be on their team even if he wasn't a vampire. I wasn't expecting such a well-described night of passion from the series like this, but we got it. I think that this was important to show that Harry and Susan obviously want to be together and to make it even more heartbreaking that they can't. This also reinforces the devastating impact of their situation and reminds us of why Harry was willing to start the conflict at Bianca's party in the first place, despite knowing all the consequences. He'll do anything for love, including that. Fuego! I also think it's hilarious that everybody seems to be trying to recruit Harry to their faction except for the White Council. You know, the one that has him. The Merlin would sell out Harry in a heartbeat if he still has the opinions that he expressed in Summer Night. And it's like Harry doesn't want to be part of any club that actually wants to have him as a member. Consequences play a big part in this series, and let's talk about them in a first-time reader-friendly way. Once again, we've seen that actions have very real consequences in this book, and Harry is very aware of that. He uses truth as something that drives him, and he knows that he has a lot of people to protect, and it really pains him when he can't save the people he loves. Like, it just tears him apart on the inside. Susan asking Harry to come with her to South America was very, very sad. Harry doesn't go because he knows that people in Chicago will get hurt by Ortega and the rest of the Red Court if he doesn't stand against them. And he can't live with himself if anything were to happen to the people he cares about. It reminds me of another offer he got, the offer to go stay on Ebenezer's farm. He really just wants to go back to the good old days when things were simpler and when Eb was sort of a protector to him. But he also knows that that would bring the fight to Ebenezer's farm, and it's not very well defended because, you know, it's a farm. There's not a wall around it. If the Reds could decimate Archangel, then they can sure take out the farm. It also reminds me of when Rashid based his vote in Summer Night on if Harry walked away from the mission or not. It just seems like Harry can't escape his duty, his destiny, and he knows it. It's not just him holding himself to the standard, it's everyone in a position to take him down if they deem necessary if he doesn't do what he has to do. Let's talk a little bit about how the characters are progressing that aren't Harry for a bit. Marcone finally makes another appearance after we saw him prove himself in Full Moon. We know that Harry doesn't like Marcone, but we also know that Marcone isn't an ordinary human either. Not that he's secretly supernatural, but he has a tenacity that just doesn't quit. After all, you have to be something special to lead Chicago's less-than-legal enterprises. It threw me for a loop when Hendricks attacked Dresden as he exited the Larry Fowler show, though. Granted, the other guests on the show proved that the supernatural baddies can move around the world undetected if they really want to. I really think that Marcone had given up on trying to recruit Dresden, and if he couldn't have him, then no one was going to get him. But that slight tell that he gave to Dresden at the gala and the unidentified person at Butter's place of employment left enough unknowns out there to tell us that something was up with Father Vincent. We get another appearance by the mysterious dark-haired woman as well. In Chapter 15, Harry's having nightmares until a dark-haired woman tells him that he needs to rest. She seems to be in his dreams and moved her hand from left to right, so she could be a magical practitioner, but we don't know for sure. This could be the same person with the feminine hands from Stormfront that kept Harry from destroying Victor Sell's lake house from afar. In that scene, Harry is mad at the world for pulling him in a direction where he was going to go down for something that he didn't do. Why risk yourself for the greater good when you could just go full warlock and solve the problem in a way that's unapproved but will keep you out of harm's way in the short term? Full warlock is a really hard thing to say, y'all. The hand takes his hand and moves it to hold onto his mother's pentacle amulet, restoring his resolve to do the right thing. This means that the woman could be his mother, or someone who knows that reminding Harry of his mother could encourage him to step back from the dark side. Right now, we don't know of any powerful female practitioners who could pull this off. But we can always guess that the woman is his mother, even though we might expect Harry to recognize her if that were the case. We know that Kravos was able to reach people through dreams, even though he was not a living being anymore. If a weaker practitioner could pull that off, I think that Mama Dresden certainly could too. And this is something that I really hope that we get clarification about in later books. I don't know, mysterious characters just get me thinking and really excited. We also got some drops about Mama Dresden from a very unlikely source that makes things even more intriguing than they already were. Nicodemus, of all people, says that Harry is little Maggie's youngest, so we know that he has an older sibling or multiple siblings. So Harry has a family. That's a big deal. We also know that Nicodemus is not only aware of Margaret Le Fay, but he has fond memories and respect for her, which is terrifying. And apparently it's rare for him to feel like that. You know, as if that makes this any better. We know from Harry's conversation with the demon Chauncey in Full Moon that Margaret almost came over to Hell's side, but that they lost her in the end. The fact that Nick not only knows her, but knew and respect her makes her seem like a very powerful and scary person. Not only do we get the hint that Harry has family still alive, which is huge for him since he grew up an orphan, we also know that whatever his mother was into wasn't good. We kind of already knew that because one does not simply make friends with fairies, vampires, and creatures of hell, but now I really need to know what Margaret Dresden was up to. So now we're going to get to all the series-wide spoilers, and if you haven't read the rest of the series and don't want things spoiled, I highly encourage you to click away and come visit me again once you're ready to hear all this. In 3, 2, 1, you've been warned. So obviously this book is a major prelude to what happens in Changes, and that gives us some snazzy Easter eggs for things that happen in that book. We're dealing with the Red Court vampires, with Susan, and with what the White Council of Wizards is really capable of. If McCoy ever took offense to the billionaire space race, they wouldn't stand a chance. When Duke Ortega joins the show as a doctor who studies and debunks the supernatural, great cover by the way, he tells Dresden that the ending of the war could save lives. Harry says, so could wiping out every single vampire out of existence. What's your point? This is totally foreshadowing, and I kind of love it. Harry is still torn up from Susan, but in a different way. Seeing her in his apartment makes him want her back, but he knows that they can't be together. They each have their own purpose in the world, even if their missions are pretty much the same. They're just doing it in different ways. Harry's meant to ultimately defeat the Reds, and Susan spends what time she has left fighting them by refusing to become one of them, and by refusing to be complicit with their mission. Also, saying her visit was all about change when this is the book where Maggie is conceived and changes is where he fights and gets his daughter and loses Susan is a hell of an Easter egg. Also, did the Red Court start this war to end Dresden or to turn him to their side? Ortega says at one point that the war isn't Harry's fault. Harry believes him on this, but others like Merlin and the other Red Court vampires disagree. We also remember Rashid trying to trick Harry into giving up his quest, with the intent that if Harry fell for the deception that no one could reasonably ask him to keep at it, instead of continuing the quest and taking responsibility for his actions, Rashid would vote that he would get sent off to the Reds. Harry is either too stubborn to quit or too weary of people who seem to offer him compassion, and that's probably a very toxic but valuable lesson for him. We know that Ortega will lie to get what he wants. We're also told that the Red Court is divided over how to handle Dresden, but that may or may not be true. Ortega offers Harry and Susan a chance to be his vassals, and for Dresden to become a vampire of the Red Court, similar to the offer that Bianca made him at the end of Grave Peril. The Red Court has also officially told the White Council that if they hand over Harry, the war will end peacefully. So far, we've assumed that the vampires wanted justice for the way Harry wronged Bianca and her guests. But Bianca could have also put him in a terrible position on purpose to force him under the Red Court's control. Since the Red Court was infected by Nemesis, it also stands to reason that Nemesis also wanted Harry on their team and under their control because of him being a Starborn and therefore being dangerous to them. We experience a lot of romantic tension between Harry and Susan in the beginning that leads to one of the most important love scenes I have ever read. I knew there was a reason why that scene was so intense. And it was also a departure from other Dresden Files stories and generally the kind of writing that I expect from a Dresden Files novel. So it was very much hint, hint, nudge, nudge, this is going to be important later. There was also a hot take going around book Twitter at one point that said that love scenes were completely pointless and shouldn't be in books. And Jim Butcher, being Jim Butcher, was like, hold my beer and watch this. And then he made a scene that was pivotal to the entire series, and I just have a lot of respect for that. I thought that was great. Now let's talk about the character that I dislike almost as much as Rudolph, Martin. He is the most boring-looking person that Harry has ever met, making him perfect for blending in. He apparently came to Chicago to take out Ortega for the Fellowship of St. Giles, which is his purpose in life. This makes Dresden and Susan trust him, Susan more so than she did before. So why did he betray them in changes? Maybe the info Susan had on the Red Court being divided was accurate and Martin was working for a faction that didn't want Ortega to end the war. Or Ortega was just using peace as a pawn. Maybe Martin was making a pass at him, or it was just a plan B for if Ortega was going to lose. Ortega would get defeated anyways, so why not get Martin closer to Harry to help him against the next plan that the Red Court came up with? I know I say this a lot, but this probably deserves a video on its own, but Martin was kind of playing both sides and trying to do things his own way and just taking opportunities where he could find them. And it's actually really, really interesting because when I read it, I was like, oh, Martin betrayed people. When actually, I think everything ended the way that Martin really wanted to, and he didn't care if he made it out or not. If I messed any of that up, I know you're going to tell me in the comments down below, and let's have fun with it. Going to the other end of the spectrum of characters I either like or dislike, let's talk about Murphy. In Chapter 5, Dresden jokes that Murphy didn't look like a monster hunting Valkyrie, which is foreshadowing for Battleground, and I am still salty about that, and I still cry occasionally when I think about it. Jim, you monster. Let's talk a little bit about Marcone for all the people that have read the series and can do spoilers. The first time that we realize that Marcone has magic working for him is when Bob comes home sick from all the wards around Marcone's place. It seems like after failing to recruit Harry Dresden to his organization and getting wrecked by the werewolves during full moon, he's decided that he needs to have magic working for him instead of against him. He's probably terrified, and he should be, and I just applaud him for taking the initiative to try to ingrain himself in the magical world, take what power he can from it and also keep himself as protected as humanly possible. It's ironic that Marcone and Nicodemus also offer each other jobs at the same time near the end of the story. This is really nice foreshadowing for the big reveal at the end of Battleground where he survives and has become a Denarian. I also just finished Small Favor and also Turncoat, and I can't wait to talk more about Marcone and the Denarians later on. I also really like the symbolism of being underground. There's a big discussion about how under the ground symbolizes the end, or at least a boundary between the living and the rest of the world. Harry lives in a basement apartment and he likes it, so what does that mean? He says it means that he overanalyzes stuff, and it probably means that there's something to it, which is really convoluted, right? I think that this means that his apartment sort of represents how he is both in the magical world and the human world, and he's one of the people who actually sees it and acknowledges it because he's a part of it. It could also be foreshadowing for the end of Changes, where he has to be a ghost for a little bit. And in some ways, the earth also represents rebirth because things pass away and then get eaten up, and then that fertilizes the soil and plants grow out of it. And so we have some circle of life stuff going on. This might not be interesting to y'all, but I read How to Read Literature as a Professor when I was in high school, and it kind of became my entire personality. So I think this stuff is cool. Tell me in the comments down below if you want to hear more about the literary stuff or not. While not directly involved in this book, I think it's fascinating to look at the white court of vampire politics going on here. I'm not gonna lie, when Thomas Wraith was revealed to be Ortega's second, I was mad. On a first read-through of the series, this feels like a betrayal. I know that Thomas wasn't 100% above board with Harry at Bianca's party, but I expected better from him. But as someone who's rereading the series, it makes sense that Lord Wraith would send his son in his place. It's hinted that Thomas isn't there to be a worthy opponent for Harry in the book, but let's take a moment to appreciate the game in hindsight. Ortega knew he could count on the White Court because both the Red and the White Court vampires organizations have been infected. Lord Wraith, we find out later on, was weak and unable to feed because Margaret Le Fay cursed him when she was expiring in childbirth. Lord Wraith also has a bad habit of trying to get rid of his sons, so in a way, this was her protecting Thomas too. By sending Thomas in his place, Lord Wraith could get rid of his pesky son and save face with Ortega and the Red Court at the same time. He could regain his power by sacrificing the one who was holding it back, because I think at this point he doesn't necessarily know that Harry is a backup part of Margaret's plan. There's a quote that Harry says to Thomas about Lord Wraith. Nice father figure. Him and Bill Cosby. And I think that aged really well considering what's been printed in the news more recently. It was funny then, and funny for being a bit too on the nose now. We also get a lot of White Council of Wizards politics. Y'all have no idea how much editing I had to do to get this one right. The Merlin is hiding everyone behind wards and hoping the war ends. Why is he doing this? Is he buying time for the Red Court to take out their allies and make the White Council face them unaided? Is he trying to buy time for something to help put things in the White Council's favor? Or does he overestimate how valuable having passage through the Never Never is? We don't particularly know at this point, even though we do know that there's research trips going to the Yucatan, and to some extent I kind of think that the Merlin sees Harry the same way that Lord Wraith sees Thomas, as a total pain in the neck that he really wants to get rid of, but that he can get something out of it first. You know, send them off, have them do the dirty work, and then not be a problem later on. Or maybe he's just waiting for Harry to fix the problem himself so he doesn't have to deal with it. You know, efficiency. But the Merlin isn't the only important White Council person that we have to talk about here. Ebenezer and Harry have a very complicated relationship that I don't think that you can fully appreciate until you're on a reread. There's this one scene where Ebenezer calls Harry and offers to let him hide out from the Red Court on his farm in Missouri. He's basically like, I know you said that you would duel Ortega, but just don't. And let me fix things for you. It's sweet and very much a jab at the senior council members who wanted to hand him over. But was it? After all, we just got done talking about how the Merlin's plan is to wait things out. Is part of the plan to sideline Harry until they can use him to make a move? I have no idea at this point. But then we have a bit of small talk about the telescope that they used to find the decommissioned satellite when Dresden was a teenager. Knowing that Ebenezer is his grandfather now, that moment seems even more sweet and parental than it did on the first read-through. Eb cared about Harry enough to do some extracurricular stargazing after they'd finished a ton of chores on the farm. You don't spend that kind of time with somebody that you don't actually care about. But by the end of the book, we know that the satellite formerly known as Asteroid Dresden crashed into Ortega's manor and took care of Ortega after he escaped the duel. Since McCoy calls Harry back to tell him to watch the news coverage on that event, we know that this wasn't an accident. Eb is the Black Staff, and he can do what he wants when it comes to magic. The staff literally protects him from going warlock as a consequence of his actions. Taking out Ortega is definitely in the best interest of the White Council, but more importantly to Eb, it helps him save Harry. Ebenezer has done some terrible things in order to protect someone he cares about. McCoy taught Harry to respect the laws of magic, and that magic comes from a place of life and protecting life. Yet there's obviously times when you have to bend the rules for the greater good. The greater good. Which leads us into the next really important thematic thing that we have here. The question of, is Harry a villain or a hero? Dresden soul gazes the bear creature and finds a man tied onto the cliff. The man screams, "As if it will help you! Nothing! You are nothing!" As someone who soul gazes Harry, remember how Denon told Dresden he wasn't going to put him in hell? What does this tell us about Harry's character? What does his soul look like at this point? How badly is he tainted even before he touches Lashiel's coin? Harry and Ortega are both heroes in certain people's eyes and villains to others. To Harry and the White Council, Ortega represents someone who leads people on trying to hurt them, and he must be stopped. To the Red Court vampires, Harry appears to be the same thing. He is the big bad monster who burned down Bianca's mansion and broke the rules of hospitality, even though she basically baited him to do it. Shiro tells Harry that the war with the Red Council isn't his fault, kind of like Ortega, except I trust Shiro's judgment a lot more. It was something that was on the brink of happening for a while, and something was going to set it off at one point or another. This is the opposite of everything that the White Council has told Harry because they pretend that it was something completely out of the blue, and they like to use it against him. Harry himself also feels responsible for starting it, even though he knows deep down it was the right thing to do. Father Forthill has a tattoo from when he, Vincent, and others took care of a vampire problem. We find out that Father Vincent is actually Quintus Cassius, a Denarian. He surrenders his coin and asks for forgiveness, and Michael accepts it because the Knights of the Cross are supposed to save people from the demons, including those who used to be Denarians, and give them a chance to choose a different path. In fact, Sonia used to be a Denarian, and he decided to give up his coin when Shiro came and talked to him in a moment of need, and he's been able to completely redeem himself and is actually a really cool character. But Harry is not a Knight of the Cross, and he hates the idea that you can ask for forgiveness in order to get out of a bad situation when you don't really want forgiveness in the first place. Basically, you say you're sorry, and then you go off and do terrible things anyways, and it's just not real. But Michael's power is limited by free will and the idea that people get to choose their own path. Michael cannot just use his sword as he sees fit. He has to follow the rules that the knights have to follow. Sonia was also turned from being a Denarian, like we talked about, and Harry keeps dubious company at best and has been given chances to do better. So he really should give other people a chance to do better. In some ways, letting Cassius go is just as fair as not ending Harry when he was a teenager after his duel with Justin Dumorn, even though everyone thinks that Harry is a loose cannon that is going to mess things up in the future. Harry says that Sonia and Michael are good men, but he isn't, and beats the crap out of Cassius. Harry had good intentions to get info out of Cassius to save Shiro, but Michael says that what he did is still wrong. Harry has done a lot of wrong over the course of the series in the name of what's right, kind of like how McCoy is the Blackstaff and breaks the laws of magic on the Council's orders. Both violate a code of morality and ethics, and both are probably tainted by it, as we've seen with other wizards. This leads to a very pointed question and a running theme throughout the series of, is Harry a hero or a villain? And I don't think that question is one that gets solved in this book. It just gets more deeply explored. This kind of brings us back to Marcone. Marcone, like Dresden, has done some pretty terrible things in pursuit of what he feels is right. His entire criminal empire is built on the guilt surrounding Amanda Beckett and trying to keep his business from producing collateral damage. Despite this, he's still a ruthless leader and someone capable of holding power over Chicago's underbelly. You don't get to be John Marcone by collecting bottle caps, and his intentions don't absolve him of his crimes. Harry's own descent down the road of good intentions is a recurring theme in the series. We see this time and time again through Harry's interactions with people. When he is going on the mission to save Susan, he smiles wide and laughs wickedly, as if he's the villain on the verge of obtaining $1 million. He also alternates between two sets of urges during his passionate encounter with Susan at the end. On one hand, he wants to be gentle, and on the other hand, his primal urges kick in, and he just doesn't care anymore. In some ways, the Fellowship of St. Giles is a foil to characters like Harry and Marcone. They have been cursed with the hunger of the Red Court vampires, not yet turned and constantly urged to feed so that they become full vampires. They are the potential bad guys trying so hard to be good by keeping their hunger in check and fighting against the beings who violated their humanity and tried to force them down a destructive path. Whereas Harry and Marcone embrace it and still continue to say that they are the good guys or they are the good enough guys. Speaking of the bad guys, Nicodemus enjoys the same brand of tobacco that Harry used to contact Olsherivus, a spirit of intellect, earlier in the book. This brand is mentioned 3 times. The first when Olsherivus tells Harry that everything is going to fall apart if he doesn't go after the Shroud. The next when Nick is trying to hurt Harry and bring him to the dark side. And finally, right before Harry picks up the coin to save the Carpenter's children from picking it up instead. One tinfoil way to read this is that Nick got information from Olsherivus that Harry was on his trail. They don't necessarily play on the same team, but we do know that Chauncey works for Hell as an information broker, so it's not out of the question that Chauncey and Olshervis were talking. But a better way to read this coincidence is that Harry must go on a quest to save everyone, even if it means losing himself. He chooses not to take the coin from Nicodemus when it's a choice between taking the coin and expiring. But when the choice to save baby Carpenter or let the baby become a Denarian comes around, Harry doesn't hesitate. Again, we get this recurring theme of Harry having to do the bad things in order to do the good things. And apparently there's this joke about Prince Albert in a can that totally went over my head because I guess I'm too young for that. And people talk about that on Reddit all the time. But it still makes sense from a literary perspective, and so I am thoroughly confused. It all comes down to when Olshervis asks Harry why he does what he does. Morality is in the eye of the beholder, and it seems like the two sides are more competing interests than one wronged party fighting back against a supposed evil. This kind of reminds me a lot of The Witcher because the lack of a difference between good and evil and monster or man is a very much recurring theme in both series. Finally, we're going to do a section called Small Hints, breadcrumbs for future videos that I need a bit more time to research. If you feel strongly about any of these, leave me a comment down below, and I may or may not try to hurry up and do a video on that stuff. Let's talk about Mr. We get a couple comments about how tough Harry thinks Mr. is. In this book, Murphy says that big dogs scare her but not little ones, and Harry responds to her by saying that dogs give Mr. something to snack on. Harry later jokes that Mr. could be his second in the duel with Ortega. This could be a throwaway line for comic relief, or it could be evidence for the Mr. is a Malk theory, even though one of the Year of the Dresden entries was a comic that shows Mr. being a vanilla mortal cat thing. And Jim Butcher always denies and says that Mr. is nothing more than a regular cat. I actually have a working theory that Mr. is a Malk changeling who doesn't want to give up his power of choice, because, you know, cats do what they want, in order to become one of the Fae. It's just not a trade-off that he's interested in doing, especially when he gets to just be the big bad cat and do whatever he wants. Hashtag goals. Ivy does like Mr., but she's also a 9-year-old girl, and what 9-year-old girl does not love cats? We keep getting these slices of Mr. where he could go either way on the mortal or Malk scale. Let's talk about Rudolph. Rudolph is to the Dresden Files as Farva is to Super Troopers. He is the guy we all love to hate, and one of these days I'm going to make a video on what exactly went wrong in his life to make him like this. But in the meantime, we get some info dropped in some throwaway lines from Murphy in this book. Murphy tells Dresden that she can't prove it, but is pretty sure that Rudolph is the reason that she got taken off the case and put on vacation. Something has changed between now and Grave Peril Book 3, where Rudolph was telling Dresden that he better save Murphy. Dresden tells us that Rudolph got romantically involved with the wrong city councilman's daughter, and his punishment is working in SI. Rudolph seems to be in denial about the magical world, despite working in SI and being exposed to it on a daily basis. We know that certain factions in the Dresdenverse have ties to people in power or in the government, such as Marcone and the White Court vampires. We also know that the White Court has a particular set of skills, romantic variety, and have no problems finding partners. It is possible that Rudolph was recruited, either willingly or not at first, to work for one of these factions. His disbelief could be a coping mechanism or a way for people to think less of him and give him a cover for actions that are very much intentional and pivotal to his mission. It might make sense that if he was working for the White Court, his final meeting with Murphy could have been him getting her out of the way for Laura to marry Harry. I need to make a more in-depth video about Rudolph, but I thought that y'all would appreciate this little teaser here. Shiro mentions that there's a Jade Court, but we haven't seen them yet. I really want to see them, and then maybe we'll get a chance to do that in the Big Apocalyptic Trilogy. Around page 225, Harry tells Anna Valmont that Marcone is the least of his worries because he is not a demon. This is hilarious considering the ending of Battleground when Marcone survives and took up a coin and became a Denarian. I love these little bits of foreshadowing. I think Jim is an expert at it. Harry says of his night of passion with Susan, "It wasn't the smart thing to do. It was the only thing to do." Does this mean that Maggie's birth was inevitable? We know that he got the idea to tie her up from Molly, despite Molly being 14 years old at the time. Molly's given first name is Margaret, the same as Maggie and Dresden's mother. My tinfoil theory is that they make a trilogy of fairy queens, the mother, the maid, and the crone, or are somehow supposed to tag team a very specific role in Harry Dresden's life. Harry does experience a dark-haired woman, preventing him from setting Victor Sell's house on fire in Stormfront, and Maggie is his reason for living and trying to stay good. So maybe, just maybe, this means that Molly will eventually be more than just his apprentice. Maybe not as a romantic interest, but as someone close enough to keep him from becoming a destroyer or a bad guy. For some definition of bad guy. I think it's funny that Harry refers to the half-turned members of the Fellowship of St. Giles as infected, given that that's how we refer to people under the influence of the outsiders. The members of the Fellowship of St. Giles are probably the most pure people in this story, besides maybe the Knights of the Cross. So this is really, really ironic. And finally, it bothers me that Nicodemus tried to give Harry Lashiel's coin when Lashiel and Enduriel, Nicodemus's fallen angel, don't generally work well together. It's an interesting choice. Like, did he want Harry to become powerful and then usurp him, or start to plot against him and become an entirely different kind of pain in the butt? Or is there another reason? I feel like the Nickelheads have way more scheming going on than we really get a good chance to look at, and I look forward to analyzing that in later books. I hope y'all enjoyed this really, really long video. I have at least an hour of raw footage that I need to go edit for y'all. And if you like what I do, hit the subscribe button, join the caffeination, and if you think I suck at this, leave me a comment down below and I'll try to suck better next time. Bye!